Well met, everyone. I am Rich the Lich, and today I am doing a review on Scourge of the Nightingale. This is part 1, called A Song of Love. This is a 47-page PDF that you can download now on DMsGuild for $5.95. The creator here, Jeff Stevens, sent me a review copy. So I will run this through my review system of layout, design, and editing, art, and of course content. And at the end of it all, I hope to better inform you as to whether or not this adventure is something that's a good fit for you and your gaming group. Let's jump into this. Up first, layout, design, and editing. So we're looking at a pretty cool front cover here. There's a lot of contrast because we have a black background. The artwork is elegant, it's clean, it's simple, and as I've read through it basically in its entirety, it makes sense of what this mask is. I don't want to have any spoilers if you choose to use this, or if maybe you might be a potential player of this content and you want to present this to your DM and say, hey dude, go out there and get this, I want you to run this. So I'll talk through it, of course, a little bit in more detail with the content of it, but the layout of the front cover looks really good. Everything stands out, everything is where it needs to be. There's a little blurb at the bottom that kind of gives us a sort of introduction as to what we're looking at. So Scourge of the Nightingale is an adventure series, and this is part 1. I don't believe the other parts are out yet, but they're coming within a month or so. This part 1, A Song of Love, is broken up further into 5 additional parts as you kind of navigate your way through the content of this single adventure here. As we start to scroll down, you've got, your normal information here, and this is the first time we see the overall aesthetic and the colors. I like that there's this parchment look to it. There's a really small, subtle flourish of design along the border and the edges, but it isn't anything that takes away, and it's very subtle. So I like that the information is kind of focused on the text and the wording of it. As we get through, we start to notice some indications of font use and the things I talk about all the time, whether you're using different colors of fonts and caps, all caps, spacing, and whatnot. And, after looking through everything and reading through the entirety of this adventure, the layout and design and the editing of this is spot on. The wording is clear and concise. There isn't anything that screams to me as being incorrect or out of place. The indents, the spacing, the use and separation between various sections is very clean and efficient. You have a lot of information here. So as you can see with some of this stuff, you've got these sort of headings that indicate here's some information for the DM, kind of the behind the scenes stuff that you should read, just like you would see in any typical module and adventure book or content. So you've got this little bit of sort of background as you see is indicated there, and as you start getting through, there's these various sections that are talking to the DM. So it's sort of the introduction and the setup, things that you should know. There are, of course, the areas that are sort of box text that you're supposed to read to your players, indicating here's what they see. As it says here, as the party nears the village, read or summarize the following. And the boxes of what you're supposed to be reading to the players is always consistent. It stands out. It's distinct and separate from the other areas. When you are setting up the encounter, or the creator and designer is offering information of how to start wrangling in some of the details so you can start getting some miniature set up and what monster stat cards you might need in order to present an encounter and a combat situation to your players. That's set up accordingly. If I scroll through and you see when it sets up other additional encounters later on, you'll notice that it will be offered in that sort of same format. The stuff you read to your players is offered in the same format. So as far as a layout goes, this thing is really spot on. Everything is nice and readable. The spacing is good. The appropriate use of fonts, the headings, there aren't too many moving parts, and my eye is not having to go through too many different colors and different font styles. You have the same font style up top, which indicates when I'm on a certain part, and then you have the exact same thing. It's just a little bit smaller. So I'm not having to read through too many different fonts, but there is never an instance where I don't know what part of the adventure I'm on. And the flow of it all and moving from one point to the next, because this adventure flows in a very, almost as if you were to navigate your way through a map, where you begin here, and then part 2 is you begin as you get to something that's called the bridge, and then part 3 is when you get towards the goblin fort, and so on. And the flow of it all, and the flow chart of the way the adventure should flow, and the rhythm and pacing as you run it as a dungeon master at your table, it is one in one, and it lines up perfectly with the flow of presentation and how everything is laid out. So I have no qualms, no issues at all with the layout of this. It's very readable. It's easy to get through. Bullet points are used. All of the things I've talked about in all my previous reviews, everything is used here to exact and perfect specifications and quality. So therefore, I'm going to give layout design and editing 2 out of 2 possible points. When we take a look at the artwork here, so the front cover, as I kind of alluded to a little bit in the introduction, is pretty good. I like it. I like the contrast here, and the mask really stands out. I'm a big fan. My favorite color scheme is always red, black, and white. Sort of the black and white and the contrast of that, but then the red to add those sort of splashes of color, and it evokes a lot of emotion. So red and the use of that when you're dealing with love and you're dealing with those sort of situations and sort of the passion of the situation that's going on here, as I'll kind of speak to a little bit when we get into content. But I like this mask, and without giving too many spoilers, there is an individual that's kind of the main villain of the story that you won't really see in this part. It kind of introduces that villain and talks about them a little bit, but it seems as though the sort of climactic battle against that villain will happen in some of the later adventures, which are still to come. They're not literally published yet. So the villain there is someone that was subject to fire, and they just kind of have had that disguised secret of life that this person disappeared and no one knows and was able to find her. So I feel like this artwork and kind of that half mask that she wears definitely strikes a good chord here, and it screams to what's happening in the beginning. Now, throughout, there is not a ton of artwork. There's a few little pieces here, and they're pretty good. So the artwork is decent. It does reference a lot of monsters, and it tells you where to go when a monster is to be referenced from something that exists already in the monster manual. It'll say, take a look at the veteran, or take a look, from the NPC list, or take a look at the hobgoblin from this monster book and whatnot. So, of course, you can always refer to those books, and you'll see the accompanying artwork. There are some main characters, and you'll see a few pieces of artwork on them. So one of them is this individual here. You have the villain that I spoke to right here, and it's cool that you just see a nice piece of artwork, and as you can see, the mask fits based on what's in the front cover. So because we're pointing at a lot of different monsters in other books, and you're always going to have that artwork, I don't think there's a necessity to have that artwork here. The maps, which is really important because you have a lot of encounters that kind of can boil down to the table space, right? And start throwing down some terrain and various things like that. The maps are on point, and they're really good. They look really good. So you've got a map here, this Goblin Fort map. And then you have this place called Bridge Tree, which is, as it sounds, a tree has fallen over and formed a bridge. I like that they've offered sort of a map in the daytime and then a map at night, because as we kind of talk about the content, you'll notice there's a lot of variety in how you want to run this adventure and the way things happen. So the maps are really good. The labeling is clear and concise, and then of course it corresponds to the appropriate sections as you would read through here, the barracks and so on. I'm not quite sure as to how much art should have been there. There's a few mentions of some other people where, yes, you're referring to them in another book. Like, for example, here you have an option to meet this NPC, Bartimer Bandiful, who is a human commoner. And of course, you can always look in the monster manual for what that commoner stat block looks like. But it would have been cool to kind of have seen sort of Jeff's or the designers and creators' take on what this commoner looks like. So there's a few spaces where art is not there, but it's decent overall. Because of the bulk of the encounters taking place and a lot of the gameplay happening kind of in that encounter roll initiative combat mode, I think the main selling point for artwork here is the maps. They need to be of high quality. They need to be very readable, so I know exactly where all the moving parts are. And because the maps are so good, though there's kind of a lot of artwork that's not here, I am going to give art 2 out of 3 possible points. Next, let's take a look at the content. So the general flow of this, as I said, is this is part 1 of an adventure series, and it's designed for 3 to 7 players anywhere. That will take you from basically level 1 all the way up to potentially level 10. It mentions some locations and places that are based in Forgotten Realms, but it does offer some suggestions of how to use this in some other worlds, even as much as to say that in Eberron, the Lazar Principalities seem like a good place to set this adventure. So rather than just saying you can use it elsewhere with a little bit of twisting, it does specifically give you an indication of where to go and what you might be able to use as the background for this setting if you're not playing in Forgotten Realms. And that first indication of sort of offering, here's some ideas of ways that you can make it yours and twist it a little bit. You don't have to adhere to everything that's here. That's the greatest strength of this content. I talk about all the time. Is it something I can just immediately plug and play and get me through a night of gameplay and use this content now? Or is there inspiration? Is there some creative fuel that I can springboard off of and kind of twist it and make my own thing entirely? Or use what's here, but maybe manipulate a little bit to fit it better with my game and my group? And I believe that this offers us both in spades. You have an adventure here that goes through multiple parts, and there is a female character that was at some sort of a party, right? And an event happened where a prank was intended to be played on her, and she ended up getting burned, and like things escalated out of control. She fell off of the side of a cliff, and she disappeared, and she didn't die. You know, as I'm reading through it, everything, I thought, okay, she's dead. Like her ghost or her spirit's coming back. Something is wrong here. Or some family member that finds the dead body is now wanting vengeance. No, this female that went through this prank that went really bad, it's kind of spiraled out of control, is back. And she wants vengeance on those that were a part of that little party, that gathering, that were responsible for the prank. This part of the adventure is kind of the first sort of her foray and her journey into getting vengeance on that first person. I would assume that the subsequent adventures and modules that may come out regarding this sort of adventure trilogy are going to be, you know, kind of dialed in towards getting vengeance on some of the other people that were present. So the strength of it is, as I said in layout design and editing, the flow of everything is really, really good. And it does a wonderful job throughout all of the content here of reminding us when we're just reading information for the DM. It tells us exactly what to read for the PCs at the table. It tells us how to set up some encounters. It offers a wealth of information on how to create some variability. If you're playing with more players than maybe is otherwise intended, here's some things you can do. If you feel like the encounter is slogging and it's bogged down too much, here's some things you can do very quickly to kind of expedite that or speed up the combat. Here's some things you can gloss over. The biggest indication is when you finally kind of start working your way towards the climax of this whole adventure series, or of this adventure, I should say, is you can kind of go in guns blazing to sort of rescue this, the captured person. Or you can pretend and sort of go in disguise as performers and entertainers as a way to sort of infiltrate in an area that is filled with large amounts of hostile folk and goblins and whatnot. But it offers that option of saying maybe the PCs want to sort of infiltrate as performers and sort of put on an act. But instead of just saying that of, hey, here's another way that they can, you know, a non-combat method that they can sort of get to the bottom of this, the amount of detail that's in the appendix. I mean, there's a player's handout here where it is called The Rescue of the Fair Goblin Maiden. This is a play written for 6 performers. Look how much is here. There's a page, another page. You have scenes. This is literally broken up as a play would be with the screenwriting and whatnot. And it is intended for the players to play these roles at the table. Something that they can read, and when it's Bricka's turn, she's going to read this line of dialogue, and when it's Grug's turn or Ambrosia's turn. And by playing through that, not only are you getting hours of gameplay in here, you're creating a very interesting way of handling this combat. And this is the best indication of showing you that it's presenting an adventure, but it's saying that while we want to, you know, sort of say this is what's supposed to happen, I want to offer you ways of you going about it depending on what the likes and dislikes of your gaming group is. And I think that's brilliant. And it does that throughout. It has multiple parts where in the journey to the fort, you have option 1, which is a glimpse of the fort, which it indicates that it may take up about 15 minutes of gameplay time. There's another option of meeting this individual named Bartimer. Now notice this is an option. It's not something that's being railroaded and saying this is who they meet. You can choose to use this NPC, as it says here. You may add this encounter if you feel you have time, depending on whether you want this to be a single night of gameplay or you want this to extend over multiple sessions. You can kind of wrangle in because everything is always offering how long this might take. And you can kind of piece that through. And I like the efficiency of that from sort of a flow of the campaign or the storyline of how long should this combat take? How long is it taking? Based on the length of that, here's some suggestions of how to sort of just say the goblins surrender so you can move on so that we can get to the climactic and the finale of this within a night of gameplay. But it offers these options, and to give this much detail about what this NPC is as an option for something that you don't even have to use, it continues to do that throughout. So for content, because of the efficiency of flow and layout and the way everything is dialed in, it's really top notch. But also the variability in how you can run it, and the constant reminding or reminders of options of, if your group is more powerful, maybe try it this way. If you feel like that previous combat was a little too weak, maybe try it this way. If we look in the beginning, it says, look at playtesting. There was a decent amount of people here that have run through this. So there's some faith and trust that you can have that this is pretty well designed when they mention sort of the behind the scenes, the DM work of figuring out what's the overall power level of your party. And here's some suggestions throughout to make sure that this is something that's challenging, but yet fun and entertaining that they can get through. And the overall content here, as far as what's here, the 2/3 of the book is the core of the adventure. And then as you start getting into the appendix, you start getting into the full maps that you can print out. It has stat blocks for, here's the play, for example, where it's the player's version that they read. And then you have a DM version as well. That is the play, which kind of maybe gives a little bit more information, behind the scenes stuff for you. You've also got, there's an entire music sheet here on a song that's sort of integral to sort of the romance aspect of this whole adventure. And then monsters, it mentions when there are monsters that are not otherwise indicated from an Volo's Guide or Monster Manual, it provides you with all the stat blocks that you need. Here's just on herself, Nightingale, and it does even mention, and that shows you how much variability and option it's leaving for the Dungeon Master. It says that she might kind of interject herself, and you'll hear about her a little bit, but she's not intended to be any actual battle here within this adventure. But if you're impatient and you don't want to wait for those later adventures to come, use her now, and if you want to, here's her entire stat block and all of the information on her magic items and whatnot. Here's some battle warg and a giant goat and goblin archers and berserkers, and you can see stat blocks on things that might not otherwise be in the book. So it gives you everything that you need. So from a content perspective, I believe there's a lot here in the adventure. There's a lot that I can immediately grab and just bring to my table. And as long as I do a little bit of legwork ahead of time, I can manipulate this and change this for the fact that I'm using more players than maybe what it's prescribed for. Or the fact that I have a very high magic campaign and my players might be a little more powerful. It gives me all of these options in these setup and counter blocks. But beyond that, from the content perspective of, is there inspiration? Is there something that sparks something here? I'm intrigued and enticed by the idea that this is just part one. I want to look further into the future content and see what's out there. For content here, I have to give this a straight 5 out of 5. I don't see any issues with it. It's easy to navigate through. It's something I can immediately print out and bring to my table. I have all the handouts and the cheat sheets and the DM stuff that I need ahead of time. And as I said, the best overall is just, if it's not going to work as written, it presents to you in very clear, concise wording and separation of where to go for that stuff, of how to make some changes to the encounters, to the CR, to the overall difficulty of the monsters. Here's some options that you want to run if your players are a little more in the social exploration sort of bent versus pure combat, and so on and so forth. So this is my final score. That's all I have for you folks. Thanks everyone for watching, and take care.